It's the end of 1982. A crane punches a massive hole through a factory roof in East London. But why? To rip the machines out and ship them to China. Just years earlier, this building was a cathedral of industry, 6,000 workers, 2 million cars a day, a British icon. It seems impossible that a company outselling Ford and GM ended up with a hole in its roof. But the answer lies in a bomb-damaged pub and a mistake they never saw coming. Stand on the corner of Lee Conservancy Road and Homerton Road in East London today, and you hear nothing. Silence. Modern apartment blocks rise where factory walls once stood, their balcony railings zinc-coated. Beneath these gentrified flats lies the ghost of Lesney Products, the company that made Matchbox cars. The year is 1947. London is a landscape of bomb sites and rationing coupons. Two Royal Navy veterans named Leslie Smith and Rodney Smith pool their war gratuities, roughly £600 between them. They need premises, and what they find is typical of the era. A derelict, bomb-damaged pub called the Rifleman. When I was reading through the early property records, I had to double-check this because it sounds fake. They didn't rent a warehouse. They literally set up an industrial die-casting foundry inside a condemned pub. The roof leaks, the space is cramped, the building should be condemned. For the two Smiths, the challenge is immense. They have to build a business from nothing in a shattered economy. And if they fail, they will lose everything they invested, including the war gratuities they earned risking their lives. But the Smiths are no strangers to adversity. Lesney Products starts as industrial die-casters, not toy makers. Ceiling hooks, automotive components, parts for electrical appliances, reconstruction work. The money is steady, the vision modest. Then comes the third man. Jack Odell is a former tank repairman with the Royal Army Service Corps, expelled from school at age 13. He didn't have the pedigree, but he had this freakish, self-taught engineering genius. At first, he was just a tenant, renting a corner of the Rifleman for his own gear. But the Smiths realized pretty quickly that they didn't just need his rent money, they needed his brain. This forms the trio that will build the empire. Leslie is the suit, totally risk-averse, sweating over the ledgers. Rodney is the steady hand. He keeps the machines running, but he isn't exactly dreaming of the future. And then there's Jack, the wizard who looks at a die-casting machine and sees a way to change the toy industry forever. Three different personalities bound by one goal, a desperate need to pay the rent. But what none of them know is that their survival depends on a war breaking out half a world away. And when Rodney Smith leaves in 1951, believing the company has no future, it will be Leslie and Jack who prove him catastrophically wrong. In 1950, the Korean War erupts. The British government rations zinc, a strategic metal for munitions. For a die-casting firm dependent on zinc alloys, this threatens extinction. When restrictions ease, industrial orders remain volatile. The triumvirate faces a choice: enter hiatus during slack periods, or take a gamble on something new. They experiment with toys. Their first attempt in 1948 is a die-cast road roller, a deliberate clone of a popular dinky model. But Odell's engineering prowess allows Lesney to produce it at a third of the cost. Superior detail through superior tooling, delivered at pocket money prices. The Lesney doctrine is born. But for the company to survive, they need a breakthrough, something that proves the market exists. The proof arrives with the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Lesney gambles on producing a miniature replica of the Gold State coach. They make two scales. It is the smaller, 4-inch version that strikes gold. Over 1 million units sold. What surprised me during the research was that they almost didn't make the smaller version. They only tooled it up because the brass shortage meant they couldn't get enough metal for the big one. That huge success? It was basically a happy accident caused by rationing. Anyways, the windfall profits buy them freedom from the Rifleman and capital for proper factory space. But to Odell, that is not enough. He knows they need something revolutionary to dominate the market. Then comes the founding myth. Now, if you know Matchbox, you know the story about Jack's daughter and the spider. He makes her a tiny brass road roller to skirt the school's only fit in a matchbox rule. It's a cute story. Maybe it's even true. But let's be real. The genius wasn't the sentimentality. It was the logistics. By standardizing the product size to fit a Matchbox, Lesnie solves a massive retail logistics problem. The toys are uniform, stackable, take up minimal counter space. They can be sold not just in toy shops, but in tobacconists, newsagents, sweet shops, places children visit daily. The Matchbox is a Trojan horse infiltrating the entire retail ecosystem of 1950s Britain. In 1953, Lesnie registers the Matchbox trademark. The first 4 models of the 175 series launch: a diesel road roller, a dumper, a cement mixer, a tractor. The numbering system becomes the periodic table of the playground. As sales explode, Lesnie moves to Hackney, consolidating operations at Lee Conservancy Road. By the mid-1960s, the factory has effectively become a cathedral of industry. Walk inside and the smell hits you first. Sweet, acrid machine oil, mixed with the metallic tang of molten Mazak. The sound is relentless. Over 150 automatic die casting machines operate in deafening unison. 2,000 gallons of lead-free paint consumed every week. 2.5 million components cast, sprayed, and assembled every single day. At its peak, Lesnie employs over 6,000 people. A significant portion are women recruited from surrounding boroughs, the Matchbox Girls. The company operates a fleet of double-decker buses, painted in corporate blue and yellow, to collect workers from their homes. The work is repetitive, fast-paced. Assembly line workers are paid piece rate, incentivizing speed. Beyond the factory walls, Lesnie sustains a cottage industry. In the living rooms of Hackney, entire families spend evenings assembling components. The company is not just an employer, it is the economic lifeblood of the borough. By 1966, Lesnie is producing over 100 million units annually. The company receives the Queen's Award for Industry. Jack Odell himself is presented to Her Majesty. This is Britain punching above its weight, a post-war success story proving that British ingenuity can still compete globally. The triumvirate has built something extraordinary, but what they do not realize is that a threat is emerging 5,000 miles away in California. By 1968, hubris has set in. Matchbox cars are realistic, durable, and slow. Heavy metal wheels on thick steel axles, designed to be pushed along a carpet, not raced. The Lesnie board believes their commitment to realism is their competitive advantage. Jack Odell himself insists that children want accuracy, not fantasy. Then Mattel launches Hot Wheels, cars with near-zero friction axles, candy apple metallic paint, chrome-plated mag wheels, Spectra Flame finishes that shimmer in the light, Delrin bushings that create near-zero friction. They do not just roll, they fly. Mattel markets them with bright orange plastic track systems, allowing loops and jumps. The California look versus British realism. In American playgrounds, the realistic Matchbox bus becomes obsolete overnight compared to the California-style hot rod. Children do not want accuracy. They want speed, they want flash, they want cars that perform stunts. The impact is devastating. American orders evaporate. Retailers cancel contracts. In 1969, Lesnie swings from record profits to a £700,000 loss. Worse, a £2 million tax bill comes due on the previous year's earnings. The board meets in emergency session. For them, the math is simple: adapt or die. Bankruptcy looms. They launch the superfast revolution, a total industrial retooling performed at breakneck speed. Every single tool and die in the Hackney factory has to be modified to accept new, thinner wire axles and wider plastic wheels. The cost runs into millions. Production lines are disrupted for months. It is panic made manifest in metal. The superfast range launches in 1969, saving market share in the short term. Sales rebound. The board believes they have weathered the storm, but what they do not know is that the financial wound from the retooling has weakened the company's reserves just as the global economy is about to enter its darkest period. The 1970s bring stagflation, industrial unrest, energy crises, the cost of raw materials soars, zinc for bodies, oil-based plastics for wheels. Every component becomes more expensive. Labor relations at Hackney begin to fray. The family firm atmosphere cultivated by the Smiths and Odell erodes under efficiency drives. The workforce is heavily unionized. The Amalgamated Union of Engineering Workers and TAS represent thousands of workers. Tensions explode. The toolroom workers, the aristocracy of the factory floor, resist efficiency measures. Their tacit knowledge of metallurgy and mold flow cannot be rushed, but the board demands faster output, lower costs. The social contract fractures. In 1976, Lesnie attempts to reorganize shift patterns, eliminating overtime opportunities. When 9 machine setters refuse the new terms and are dismissed, they claim redundancy payments. The case goes to the Court of Appeal. Lord Denning rules for Lesnie, establishing that redundancy situations do not exist if the amount of work remains constant, even if terms change. The ruling is a blow to worker protections. It allows companies to radically restructure without triggering redundancy payouts. The social contract on the factory floor sours. Workers who once took pride in Matchbox now feel betrayed. For Lesnie, the legal victory is hollow. The cost of operations continues to climb. Union relations deteriorate further. By 1981, the company is trapped. Bank debt exceeds £20 million. The value of the pound sterling soars, making British manufactured goods prohibitively expensive. In America, Lesnie's most critical export market. Meanwhile, competitors move production to Hong Kong and Macau, slashing labor costs. Lesnie's commitment to manufacturing in London becomes unsustainable. The company closes 10 of its 13 plants. The workforce is cut by 41% between 1980 and 1982, but it is not enough. They cannot outrun the debt. On June 11, 1982, the unthinkable happens. Lesnie Products and Company Limited is declared insolvent. Receivers are appointed to manage the carcass of the giant. For the workers in Hackney, the news is trauma. The factory that seemed as permanent as the Tower of London is suddenly fragile. The bustling industry that employed thousands grinds to a halt. The blue and yellow buses stop running. A buyer is found, but he is not British. David Ye, Shanghai-born founder of Hong Kong-based Universal Toys, purchases the Matchbox brand and assets. Ye started as a bank teller and rose to become a titan of the Asian toy industry. A visionary businessman who built his fortune, understanding one truth: manufacturing follows labor costs. For Ye, the opportunity is clear. The Matchbox brand has global recognition, decades of goodwill, a product that sells itself. But he has no sentimental attachment to Hackney, no loyalty to British workers, no interest in preserving heritage. His strategy is ruthless rationality. Keep the intellectual property, move manufacturing to low-cost centers in Macau and mainland China. The brand survives, the factory does not. The physical end is marked by violence. To extract the massive, custom-built die-casting machines for shipment to Macau, the new owners punch a hole through the factory roof. Cranes reach in and pluck the heart out of the building. Those machines, designed by British engineers to build British toys, dangle over Lee Conservancy Road on their way to Asia. The transfer of industrial power from west to east, made literal. The collapse leaves a bitter legacy. Pension protection laws in 1982 are weak. The insolvency leaves the company pension fund vulnerable. Workers who dedicated decades to Lesnie find their retirement security tied to liquidation of assets sold for pennies. Long-term employees face significantly reduced entitlements. Why did it fail? The unions blame greedy management. Management blames global markets. The truth is, a collision of forces, rising costs, soaring exchange rates, Asian competition. A company built on British labor rates trying to compete in a globalizing world. Lesnie invested millions in retooling to meet the Hot Wheels threat, but emerged financially weakened. When the macroeconomic storm hit in the early 1980s, there were no reserves left. The company that once employed 6,000 could not adapt fast enough. But Jack Odell refuses to accept the ending. In 1982, he partners with Burt Russell to buy back some of the older Matchbox tooling from the receivers, specifically the models of yesteryear dies. He establishes a new company, Lado, in Enfield. Odell spelled backwards. For another 17 years, Lado continues to produce die-cast vehicles in England, a stubborn postscript to the Lesnie empire. It proves the skills and market still exist, even if the original corporate vehicle failed. The factory on Lee Conservancy Road stands derelict for years. It is finally demolished in 2010. The site is redeveloped into Matchmaker's Wharf. Artist studios occupy some units, but the roar of the die-casters is gone. Yet in the absence of the factory, history lives lives in the objects themselves. Collectors practice industrial archaeology, hunting for variations and errors that reveal the human and mechanical quirks of the production line. Now we have to talk about the holy grails, the brown Magirus Deutz crane. I've only ever seen high-res photos of this thing, never one in the wild. Some people think these errors were lunch hour specials, workers messing around with leftover paint just to see what would happen. I love that idea, that a £13,000 collector's item started as a bored factory worker having a laugh on a Tuesday. Transitional models from the 1969 Superfast Panic are prized. Regular wheel bodies fitted with Superfast wheels. Superfast boxes containing old regular wheel stock. These hybrids are artifacts of corporate desperation, physical evidence of the factory floor and chaos. Each variation tells a story. Each error reveals the pressure, the speed, the human hands guiding machines under impossible deadlines. Today, Matchbox remains a powerhouse brand under Mattel. The toys are still loved. Children still play with them, but they are made in China, Vietnam, Thailand. Britain lost the world's biggest mini-car empire not because the toys stopped being cherished, but because the economic logic that created them in Hackney ceased to exist. The synergy of cheap skilled labor, protected export markets, and material innovation dissolved. The empire moved east, leaving behind the ghost of a factory and millions of tiny zinc monuments scattered in attics across the world. Walk past Matchmaker's Wharf today. Close your eyes. Imagine the smell of molten Mazak, the thump of 150 die casting machines, the blue and yellow buses delivering the Matchbox girls at dawn. Imagine 2.5 million components flowing through this space every day, destined for playgrounds in 130 countries. Then open your eyes. The factory is gone. It's just overpriced apartments now. The Lesney story is not unique. It is the story of British manufacturing in the 20th century. Energy in the rubble of war. Optimism in the global boom. Collapse against the rocks of globalization. We did not lose Matchbox because we stopped being brilliant. We lost it because brilliance was not enough. The question haunts, could different choices have saved it? Cheaper production methods, earlier offshore manufacturing, or was it always doomed, a victim of forces too large for any single company to resist? Perhaps the answer lies in those tiny cars themselves. Millions survive, cherished by collectors, passed down through generations. They were made to last, and they did. The factory is gone, but the legacy rolls on. What do you remember about Matchbox? Share your stories below and suggest topics you want us to explore.